You are listening to Now That's a Good Question, a podcast series powered by Sook, where changemakers from across the world answer your queries on sustainable lifestyle. After all, it's not just good on you, but also for the earth.
Hello there, I'm Nitisha Agrawal, founder and director of a not-profit organization working in clean energy sector called Smokeless Cookstove Foundation. And I'm currently working on developing large-scale projects affecting clean energy transition for low and marginal communities in India. Welcome to the episode of Now That's a Good Question, powered by Sook. And in today's episode, I'm going to be answering a few interesting questions on the topic, how are indigenous communities taking the lead to combat climate change? So without wasting any time, let's begin with the first one. You've been working with many indigenous communities. Can you tell us something about them? But this has to be my favorite question to get us started. I actually work with different communities who are in need of clean energy access. Some of them are indigenous, some are migrating, some are nomadic, some of them are based in rural or peri-urban sections of our society, but all of them are very unique in their cultural identities. Over the last 5 years of my work with my foundation, I've had some amazing, overwhelming experiences of working and living with the tribal in places in Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Gujarat, Ladakh, Himachal Pradesh, Rajasthan, and several other places in India. But I did spend a considerable amount of time with one particular tribal community, the Korkus of Khandwa in Madhya Pradesh, and I have so many wonderful memories of my time with them. Their life and their lifestyle is steeped in amazing harmonious relation with nature and everything that nature contains. This tribal community, unfortunately, is more often looked at for problems related to malnutrition and infant mortality rather than their native practices. But it's important to note why such a tribal community face this kind of an issue of malnutrition. Well, it's because they have been forced to give up or alter their indigenous farming practices, which not only makes them vulnerable to unstable market access and dishonest middlemen, but it severely affects their own food habit and their intake. Their native strength-giving wild produce like mahua and native millets like kutki is being replaced by cash crop like soya. And this does not provide the kind of nutrition that these tribals are in need of. So this unnatural food growing and eating has led them to being extremely malnourished and very, very impoverished. Having said that, my time in Khandwa with the Korku village is something that is memorable. And I was totally taken away by the beauty of their culture, their forward-thinking problem-solving tactics, and their love for the forests. It's amazing to see how they live in harmony with the forest, and all their festivals, important milestones of birth, adolescence, marriage, and death are intertwined by their relation to the forest gods, which include trees, animals, rivers, even rocks and stones. And this harmonious coexistence is something I saw in common with tribals of Are in Mumbai. Wadlis are very popular among them. The Vasava tribes of Gujarat, the tribal belt in Sirohi, Rajasthan, the nomadic tribes of Changthang. And I think this is the common thread that binds all of the native tribes around the world. So that was a nice thing to talk about. Moving on to the second question of today's episode. What role do indigenous people play in achieving sustainable goals of a nation? Indigenous people are at heart of climate change. Yes. But if we leave aside the daunting yet crucial goal of achieving the SDGs by all of the world's nation, I believe that our native tribes already live and practice sustainability. And this is because their relation with their ecosystem is not about profiteering and consumerism, but it's about survival and it's about respectful coexistence. So there is so much to learn from them. And we can simply help them by allowing these tribes to live the way they have been living for centuries, like how their elders lived, like how their ancestors lived. But we can also simultaneously work towards involving them in certain crucial development aspects like perhaps better education and healthcare facilities, consisting livelihood generating opportunities that do not force them to migrate from their native homes, opportunities to access cleaner energy practices within their immediate environment, conservation science and know-how that can help them preserve their own natural habitat, help them adopt to newer and useful technologies like telephonic communication, satellite linkages that can help them protect wildlife and aspects like forest fires and cyclones, and so many other things. But interestingly, these tribes already practice communal living where they look out for each other and participate in each other's happy and sad moments, times of distress. And this is what is SDG 17, which is all about collaboration and partnership. So truly, the indigenous communities do not have to do something out of ordinary to help nations achieve the sustainable goals. It is us, the city dwellers, who need to, on the one hand, not obstruct, destroy, and take over what's theirs, but also subtly include ourselves in their lives as observers and perhaps willing partners to learn from them and work together with them. Let's move on to the third question now. What are the key challenges in including indigenous people in the sustainability movement? Well, I think the more important issue over here is to understand what this sustainability movement is all about and why is there even a differentiator in terms of community involvement. Sustainability has been a buzzword for the last few years because we now have understood and acknowledged the dangers that we have posed as a human race upon our home, the earth, and hence threatening our own future existence. But as I already pointed out, our native tribes always knew that we cannot cross the planetary boundaries. We cannot take more than what we need and not even bother to replace and replenish. They always knew that we have great responsibility on our shoulders to make sure that we respect the nature as Gaia, as our mother. So from my point of view, the challenge does not lie in including the indigenous people in this movement. The challenge is for us to accept that we need them, their knowledge and their know-how to make this so-called movement more impactful, more inclusive, and result-oriented. Well, we're in the second half of the episode now, and here is the fourth question. What role does your company, Smokeless Cookstove Foundation, play in empowering the indigenous members of the society? Our work at Smokeless Cookstove Foundation lie at the core of a household, or what we call as the heart. So when someone opens up their kitchen to you, they also open up their hearts and hand over their trust to you. And that's what Smokeless Cookstove Foundation honors. Our solution to replace the rudimentary mud chulhas, which are open cook fire and highly polluting, with that of rocket stove technology-based intervention, fully recognizes that we cannot displace the traditional cooking practices by simply putting a gadget in their homes. Hence, we created a program called Smokeless Cookstove Revolution, which is a grassroots intervention model. We work with communities over extended periods of time, firstly by trying to understand their cooking methodology and their fuel dependencies, and then training them in making these highly efficient zero-cost mud chulhas as a skill development. Now for this, more often than not, I end up staying in the homes of our participating communities, cook and eat with them to not only understand their lifestyle, but form a bond of trust with them. And I can tell you that the tribals are very, very trusting in nature. So our objective is to train and empower women from the community who can learn the skill. It's the woman who's usually doing the cooking, and help them graduate from a smoky, polluting cook stove to an efficient, improved cook stove, yet retain the essence of traditional cooking that comes from firewood and mud. And this is particularly crucial to the tribals who have such unique cultural identity attached to their foods and cooking habits. So by not taking it away completely and by allowing them gradually into the concept of clean cooking is what we endeavor to do. Interestingly, currently, we are working with the tribals of RA Forest in Mumbai, and we are trying to develop a concept which is clean cooking for livelihoods, wherein we have trained some Adivasi women in making rocket chulha based on our technology, and creating a program that is able to help them earn additional income by installing these clean cook stoves in the villages. And at the same time, they are staying within their ecosystem. They don't have to go to outside the location to earn their income. This allows them to spend more time with their families, and they are actually playing a role towards mitigating climate change from their very kitchens. So let's move on to the fifth question now. One sustainable thing that indigenous people follow and you feel urban lifestyle must adapt to? That's a really good question. And I think, the more time I spend with the tribal communities, the more I feel I wish I can be one of them. The very way of living for the indigenous community is sustainable because it's in sync with nature and its rhythm. But the most interesting aspect of their lives, according to me, that we should study and try and adopt into our own urban lifestyle is actually their food habits. So these natives are changing their foods as per season, and they are growing and eating only those foods that nature supports through its seasonality. They, of course, store their grains in an organic manner so that they are able to access that food availability throughout the year. But it's important to understand this because our bodies actually are naturally in need of a particular kind of food in a specific season. You must know that, even in our own ancient knowledge, there is concept of heating and cooling foods, sattvic foods that are meant to be eaten at a particular time in specific season. Our grandmothers spoke of it. So this is exactly what the indigenous communities practice. This is how they live. And hence, I believe that their bodies are stronger and more healthier, and they're able to fight illness better. I remember during one of my travels in Khandwa in Madhya Pradesh with the Korkus, I actually saw a pregnant Adivasi lady who was going through a lot of trouble in trying to deliver her baby. And the primary healthcare worker was not really able to help her in the process. So one of the village elders came up and gave her a soup made of mahua and some native millets, which actually eased her pain. And then she was able to deliver pretty smoothly. So when I asked that, what was it that made her go through this delivery easily? What did you really give her? So the tribal lady told me that, this pregnant lady had simply lost her strength to push. And she needed something that will help her regain her strength and energy. And when I witnessed that, it was truly a miracle for me. So after that episode, during my travels, I try and get my fix of things like nachni, jowar, rice, dals, honey, ghee from these village communities directly as much as possible, because I know that, these have been grown and preserved and harvested in harmony with nature and are completely organic. That was fun to answer. There's a lot more that I could share over here, but let's move on to the sixth question. How can organizations and individuals contribute to the sustainability by including indigenous people? I think this is really important point when we talk about sustainability movement. The fact that these indigenous people already are sitting on wealth of knowledge and solutions that are time tested. Organizations and climate change leaders need to tap into that by involving them in research and decision making. If you consider clean energy sector where I work, it's about helping communities tap into solutions that are useful and affordable for them and can be easily accessed. And hence, to implement these interventions, we need to include the community influencers, both in planning and delivering stages, keeping their interest in mind. Climate change, seasonality, rain patterns, farming and crop cycles, drought, flooding. Nobody understands these phenomena better than our natives and our indigenous communities. And we know that many small and large-scale industries depend on natural resources, and often unplanned growth of these lead to ruthless plundering of those resources. But instead, if these organizations could consider starting at the drawing board with research and knowledge-based ideas together with the local native communities, involving them in planning and making them a part of the profit value chain, then the outcome will be more sustainable and less destructible. But you know what? This has to be done by not displacing them from what's originally and ancestrally theirs. And with that, this is the last question. One question about sustainability that made you go, now that's a good question. And for me, that has to be, how can we make clean energy intervention sustainable? The relevance of this question is very critical because it is also one of the biggest barriers that I see in my work in this sector. Imagine the amount of planning and investment that goes into developing a solution for, let's say, clean cooking based on certain lab indicators, historic data, and research reports. Now here, we must acknowledge that globally, 3 billion people still do not have access to modern clean cooking methods. And in India, it's almost about 40 million such people. Now, if that solution is to be implemented to a section of this population, we're still talking about a sizable number of people in terms of scale. And we know the diversity and fragmentation of our country. We know that people have different eating and cooking habits. So if that solution does not prove acceptable by the user community and hence not sustainable, it means all that effort gone waste, all that investment gone down the drain. So that is why it's absolutely critical to look at solutions impacting the large sections of needy communities from the lens of adaptability and long-term sustainability. So it creates the necessary impact, and so it helps us leading to achieving those sustainable goals for the world. And it can be done, and it should be done by involving the communities in solution value chain right from the very beginning. So thank you so much for tuning in into the last episode of season 1 of Now That's a Good Question with me, Nitisha. You can follow our work at smokelesscookstove_team on Instagram, or look up our website, www.smokelesscookstovefoundation.org.
Thank you for tuning in.